Bismarck called the Berlin Conference, not because he cared about Africa. He reportedly said Germany had no colonial ambitions, but because competing European claims in the Congo Basin were threatening a European war. Africa was the instrument of a European diplomatic problem. The conference's purpose: manage European competition, not design African governance. The borders it produced reflect European negotiating positions rather than African geographic or cultural realities. And those borders, drawn to solve a European problem that no longer exists, are the borders 55 African nations inherited as their permanent territorial foundations. In 1880, approximately 10% of Africa was under formal European colonial control, primarily coastal trading posts and the Cape Colony in South Africa. By 1914, approximately 90% of Africa was under European colonial control. The transformation happened in 34 years, the fastest territorial takeover in human history. The Berlin Conference's specific contribution was legal rather than military. It established the rules by which European powers could claim African territory. Effective occupation, demonstrated by a trading post, a flag, and a registered claim, was sufficient to establish colonial sovereignty. The conference gave the scramble a legal framework. The scramble provided the content. The Africa that European powers divided at Berlin was not, as colonial-era propaganda suggested, a primitive, ungoverned space waiting for European administration. It was a continent of sophisticated political entities, complex trade networks, diverse urban cultures, and ancient civilizations. The Kingdom of Dahomey in West Africa had a professional standing army including female soldiers, the Agoge, that defeated French forces in multiple engagements before being overwhelmed by superior weaponry in 1994. The Zulu Kingdom had unified a vast territory under sophisticated military and political organization. The Ashanti Empire controlled significant gold trade routes. The Sokoto Caliphate governed approximately 10 million people under Islamic law. These were not primitive societies. They were organized political entities that European colonialism systematically dismantled. The specific cartographic ignorance of the Berlin Conference delegates is documented in the maps they used. Large sections of the African interior were marked unexplored or left blank on European maps in 1984. The delegates were allocating territory whose geography, population, and political organization they did not know. The General Act of Berlin, the conference's founding document, did not require European powers to know anything about the territory they were claiming. It required only that they demonstrate effective occupation after the claim was registered. The conference created a legal mechanism for the distribution of ignorance, a framework that rewarded the fastest flag planting rather than the deepest understanding of the territories being claimed. The specific borders that European colonialism drew across Africa followed three primary logics, none of which had anything to do with African ethnic, cultural, or political geography. The first, rivers and lakes, used as natural boundaries because they were visible on maps and required no survey work. The second, lines of latitude and longitude, used when natural features were absent or disputed, producing the straight-line borders visible across the Sahara and sub-Saharan Africa that cut through territories with the geometric indifference of a ruler on a map. The third negotiated compromises between competing European powers, where specific districts or trading areas were allocated to one power or another, based on European diplomatic bargaining rather than African geographic logic. The straight-line borders of Africa are the most visually obvious evidence of the Berlin Conference's cartographic indifference to African realities. The border between Egypt and Sudan, a line of latitude. The border between Libya and Chad, a line of latitude. The border between Algeria and Mali, a line of latitude. The borders of the former British Bechuanaland, the borders of French Sudan, the borders of Italian Somaliland, all contain significant straight-line sections drawn by European officials at desks in London, Paris, and Rome, using rulers on maps of territories they had never visited. The straight lines are the specific visual signature of borders drawn without knowledge of what they were crossing. The Berlin Conference's borders cut through approximately 177 African ethnic groups, dividing communities between two or more colonial territories, whose successor states became nations with different languages, different legal systems, different economic policies, and different military alliances. The Ewe people were divided between French Togoland and British Gold Coast, now Togo and Ghana. The Somali people were divided between British Somaliland, Italian Somaliland, French Somaliland, and Ethiopia, 4 different territories whose borders produced the Somali irredentist conflicts that have generated instability in the Horn of Africa for 60 years. The Tuareg people were divided between Algeria, Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso, and Libya, a division that has produced 3 Tuareg rebellions in the past 40 years. The Democratic Republic of Congo, the Belgian Congo of the Berlin Conference era, is the most complete expression of the conference's failure. The DRC contains approximately 250 ethnic groups, enormous mineral wealth, the Congo River Basin, and borders drawn by King Leopold II of Belgium's personal colonial project, with reference to nothing except the extent of his claimed control. The DRC has experienced near-continuous civil conflict since independence in 1960, including the Congo Crisis, the Mobutu era, 2 Congo Wars in the 1990s, and the ongoing Eastern Congo conflict that has killed approximately 6 million people since 1996. The borders that contain this conflict are the borders Leopold drew. The minerals that fuel the conflict were the minerals that attracted colonial exploitation. The DRC's tragedy is the Berlin Conference's most complete consequence. The Organization of African Unity's founding charter of 1963 contained a specific decision that locked the Berlin Conference's borders permanently into the African state system. The principle of uti pusitatis, the acceptance of colonial borders as the founding borders of independent African states. The decision was made by African leaders who understood the borders' illegitimacy and chose to accept them anyway. The reasoning was pragmatic and documented. Redrawing borders across a continent of 55 nations and 10,000 ethnic groups would produce conflicts more destructive than the borders themselves. The colonial legacy was accepted as the least bad option available to leaders who had just won independence and could not simultaneously fight border wars. The pragmatism was real. The cost has been paid across 60 years of conflict produced by borders the OASU accepted but could not legitimize. The specific conflicts that the uti pusitatis decision has produced are documented across every decade since 1963. The Nigerian Civil War, the Biafra conflict from 1967 to 1970, killed between 1 and 3 million people and was directly produced by the colonial amalgamation of incompatible ethnic groups into a single Nigerian state. The Ethiopian-Eritrean War from 1998 to 2000, over a border the Italian and British colonial administrations had drawn, killed approximately 80,000 people and remains one of the most militarized borders in Africa. The Western Sahara conflict, Morocco versus the Sahrawi people, is a direct consequence of Spanish colonial withdrawal creating a disputed territory. Every decade, every region of Africa, the same pattern. The Africa that the Berlin Conference divided contains the most extraordinary geographic and ecological diversity on Earth. The Sahara, the world's largest hot desert, covering approximately 9 million square kilometers. The Congo Basin, the world's second largest tropical rainforest, the planet's second lung, after the Amazon. The East African Rift Valley, the most geologically active continental system on Earth, containing some of the world's deepest lakes, the highest concentration of large mammal species anywhere, and the specific landscape that produced the earliest evidence of human evolution. The Serengeti's annual wildebeest migration. Approximately 1.5 million animals moving in the largest terrestrial migration on Earth. The Okavango Delta, an inland river delta that floods annually to produce one of the world's great wildlife habitats. The continent the conference divided is the world's most biodiverse. The Great Rift Valley, the geological system running from the Afar Triangle in Ethiopia to Mozambique, contains the specific landscape where the earliest evidence of human evolution was found. The Olduvai Gorge in Tanzania, where Luis and Mary Leakey found Homo habilis fossils dated to approximately 1.8 million years ago. The Awash Valley in Ethiopia, where the Australopithecus fossil Lucy was found, 3.2 million years old, the oldest known human ancestor at the time of discovery. The Rift Valley's specific geological activity, the volcanic lakes, the soda flats, the flamingo aggregations of Lake Nakuru and Lake Bogoria, produces some of the most extraordinary natural environments on Earth. The conference that divided this landscape was held in a Berlin winter by men. African resistance to the Berlin Conference's colonization was immediate, sustained, and systematically violent in its suppression. The Hero and Nama genocide in German Southwest Africa, now Namibia, from 1904 to 1908 killed between 65 and 80% of the Hero people and 50% of the Nama people. Germany has formally acknowledged it as a genocide. The Maji Maji Rebellion in German East Africa from 1905 to 1907 killed approximately 200,000 people, primarily through the German colonial response's deliberate destruction of food supplies. The Zulu Wars, the Ashanti Wars, the Mahdist War in Sudan. The resistance to colonization produced by the Berlin Conference's legal framework was met with the specific lethal violence of technologically superior colonial military forces. The colonization was not peaceful. It was enforced with mass killing. The specific contemporary consequence most directly traceable to the Berlin Conference's legacy in 2026 is the Sahel conflict, the multi-state crisis across Mali, Burkina Faso, Niger, Chad, and Nigeria that has produced the world's fastest-growing humanitarian crisis. The Sahel crisis is produced by the specific combination of Tuareg territorial grievances across borders that divide their homeland between 5 states. Jihadist organizations, exploiting the governance failures of post-colonial states, whose borders do not correspond to their population's political identities, and the specific economic marginalization of landlocked countries whose borders were drawn without reference to their economic logic. The Sahel crisis is the Berlin Conference's most active contemporary legacy, producing 3 million displaced people, 14,000 conflict deaths in 2023 alone, and the withdrawal of Western military forces that could not address the underlying structural cause. The Berlin Conference's specific contribution to the Borders Drawn in Bad Faith series is the demonstration of the series' argument at continental scale. Sykes-Picot divided the Middle East between 2 men. The Durand Line divided the Pashtuns with 1 official. The Radcliffe Line divided India with 1 cartographer. The Berlin Conference divided an entire continent between 14 nations in 1 winter, without a single African representative, without knowledge of most of the territory being allocated, and without any requirement to understand what was being divided. The scale is the argument's most extreme expression. 177 ethnic groups cut by colonial borders, 55 nations built on those borders, 60 years of conflict produced by the OEU's pragmatic decision to accept what could not be legitimized. The series' central pattern, confirmed at its largest possible scale: 14 nations, 1 Berlin winter, no Africans in the room, 1 continent divided, 177 ethnic groups cut, 55 nations built on colonial borders. 60 years of accumulated conflict whose structural cause cannot be addressed by military intervention, because the structural cause is the borders themselves. The series continues next episode with the 38th parallel. The line 2 American Army officers drew on a National Geographic map in one night in August 1945 to divide Korea between American and Soviet occupation zones. They chose the 38th parallel because it placed the Korean capital Seoul in the American zone. They had no authority from either Korean government. There was no Korean government, and no knowledge of whether the line made geographic, ethnic, or economic sense. It did not. The line they drew in one night produced the Korean War, the death of 4 million people, the world's most militarized border, and the most isolated and dangerous nuclear state on Earth. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because the story doesn't end here, it evolves. Borders Drawn in Bad Faith continues. 2 more borders, 2 more episodes. The pattern does not change, the consequences compound.